Good evening. I am Deputy Counsel Chris Ray, and I will be chairing this evening's study session. I'd like to call to order the February 9th Issaquah City Council study session. Before we move into tonight's agenda, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. On March 6th, the mayor issued an emergency proclamation declaring a civil emergency in the city due to the COVID-19 outbreak. On March 24th, the governor issued Proclamation 20-28 related to the COVID-19 emergency and open public meetings. The proclamation has been extended until the termination of the state of emergency or until repealed by the governor or the legislature. Due to these proclamations, tonight's meeting will be held entirely remotely. The meeting will be recorded, streamed live, and available later for viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen to the meeting or to make comments. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There's a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you may make comments after the staff presentation and council questions on each agenda item tonight. If there's anyone on the call who would like to make public comment but did not sign up, please press *3 on your phone now or under the later comment period, and we will call on you using the last 2 digits of your phone number. Additionally, Council President Hunt will also share a summary of any comments that we have received via email regarding tonight's agenda items. I'd like to now take a roll call of the council members in attendance. Say here when I call your name. Councilmember DeMichelle?
Here.
Councilmember Goodman?
Here.
Councilmember Hall?
Here.
Council President Hunt?
Here.
Councilmember Martz?
Here.
Councilmember Walsh?
Here.
Great. We have all 7 of us. Due to a staffing availability, agenda item B, electronic vehicle charging, will be moved to the last item on tonight's agenda. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this topic can comment under the general public comment period at the beginning of the meeting or wait until after the staff presentation and council Q&A on that item. The first item on the agenda is public comment. Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Yes.
Great. Citizen comments are an important part of the public process, and we take them seriously and factor them into the decision-making process. Please direct comments to the whole council and not individuals. While this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, unmute your microphone by pressing *6, state your name, address, relation to the city, speak clearly, pause frequently, and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Remute your microphone when done. If you do not respond when your name is called or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. Clerk, can you identify the first person who has signed up to speak?
Yes, and before I do that, a reminder to our callers, I'll send you a request to unmute. You'll then need to press *6 on your phone, and if you muted your phone, you'll also need to unmute it. The first caller that we have signed up is Leah Missick. Leah, also please let us know if you'd like to comment now at the beginning of the meeting, or if you'd prefer to wait and make comments under the EV item later on the agenda.
Hi there, this is Leah. I'm happy to comment closer to the item. I'm happy to stick around if that works better for folks.
You know, you're welcome to do either, so it's really up to your preference.
I'll wait, but thank you.
Okay.
Tisha, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Leah, I've muted you, and our next person who signed up to speak is Ann Fletcher, and I'll request you unmute now.
Can you hear me?
You're coming through great.
Great, thank you. This is Ann Fletcher. I'm a resident and a member of People for Climate Action. I'm here to speak about the electric vehicle charging ordinance. I believe Issaquah should move forward on an electric vehicle charging ordinance agenda bill. We are currently waiting 1 to 2 more years to get the needed land use and building codes overhauled and a climate action plan in place. And meanwhile, steps like this ordinance can give a jump start on addressing climate change. And it can be easily modified if needed and folded into the larger plans and codes as they develop. We have less than a decade to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, a goal the city has committed to through the King County City Climate Agreement. Electric vehicles are a significant element in this. The earlier we start, the better we will do towards having clean and healthy air. This ordinance is an opportunity to encourage and meet the growing demand for electric vehicles. Evidence of significant electric vehicle increase is coming from major companies, car manufacturers, and state bill proposals, and it's coming fast. In fall 2019, the Council expressed a keen interest in taking action on climate change as soon as possible. With the climate convening recommendations, support by current city plans and policies, and the vetting that's been done by the administration, the Planning Policy Commission, and the Environmental Board, I believe we are ready to take the next step toward an ordinance. I urge you to move forward on the multifamily and commercial charging aspects. They can be effective at this time and should not be put off to long timelines. Meanwhile, determine the other issues, which include single-family units should be required to have EV charging ability, but according to a written legal opinion of the city's attorney, that is not allowed by the state building council. And that opinion seems to be quite valid. That leads me to wonder how land use can determine all the other specifics of parking stalls, the number, the size, etc., but can't request that the stalls be EV capable. It also leads me to wonder why and how the state omits single-family units from EV charging building code, while it's promoting so many other progressive climate measures. And why, despite the state to King County and regional code collaboration, proposed single-family EV. Is this going to change soon? I think our recourse is to resolve these legal issues by working with the county and the regional code collaboration to lobby the state and the building code council. Those two groups that we could work with are already proposing EV for single family, and we should consider language in the ordinance to automatically match state upgrades. The only other issue that I wanted to speak to is the affordable housing units. They should be required to support equity, but the cost might discourage affordable housing building. However, lower income people cannot necessarily depend on transit to get to work or meet their other needs. And most other jurisdictions do not exempt affordable housing. Few decrease the requirement. If low-income people have not traditionally used electric vehicles, it doesn't mean that they won't in the next 10 years, particularly when there will be an increase in second-hand electric vehicles. 50% of electric vehicle requirement proposed by the administration is better than a waiver. It is still less than equitable, but it is better. Consider how much the EV requirement actually adds to the total cost of the project, and negotiate other cost savings with the affordable housing developers that does not directly impact low-income folks. I urge the city to take a leadership role to make the most effective ordinance they can now and work regionally at the state level to strengthen it further over time. The earlier we address climate change, the easier it will be to safeguard humans and our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. City Clerk, is anyone else signed up to speak this evening?
No one else has signed up to speak in advance, but we do have members of the public on the call. If anyone else is wishing to make comments at this portion of the meeting, please press *3 on your phone. That's *3 to raise your hand. And I'm not seeing any indication of anyone else wishing to speak at this point in the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Ann, for your comments. Well, let's move on to our next agenda item. As I noted earlier, item B, the electrical vehicle charging discussion, ID 0827, is going to be deferred until the last item on the agenda. So we are going to move on to ID 0654, Mobility Work Plan Overview, presented by Transportation Manager John Mortensen. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deputy President Ray, for the introduction. Got a presentation for our work plan that I'm going to get loaded up for everyone. I'm John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager. Thanks for having me here tonight to talk about the Mobility Work Plan. Tonight, during our portion of the meeting, before we get to the electric vehicles, we're going to have an opportunity for council to ask questions on the informational updates that are provided in the agenda regarding the pavement management program, the transportation capital projects, and the transit update. I'll talk a little bit about updating what we're working on for the mobility work plan. Senior Transportation Planner Stephen Padua is going to provide an update on both the mobility master plan as well as the complete streets ordinance that he's working on. And finally, Matt Ellis, the senior engineer, will be providing an update on the work that we're doing in Old Town to calm traffic. Inside the agenda packet were some informational updates about transit, the pavement management program, and the capital projects. And what I'd like to do is pause my presentation to see if council had any questions that either Bennett Ashbaugh, the street manager, Stephen Padua, or myself could answer about those memos.
Great. Thanks, John. If there's any questions, please indicate in the chat. We'll wait a second or two. John, I'm not seeing any questions at this time, so please proceed.
Okay, thank you. A few things that we wanted to update you on are, the first one is up in the Issaquah Highlands, they had been pursuing a program that would provide a shuttle, a fixed route shuttle, and that work began in 2019. However, we recently learned that the work that they were doing for the shuttle has been postponed, and they also have a van program that they acquired a vehicle for Metro in 2020, and right now the Issaquah Highlands is designing what sort of service program they will use this van for. The next item is talking about shuttle options for Issaquah. That over the years we've talked about a number of different things, and in Stephen's memo we wrote about different options, whether we wanted to begin exploring a shuttle option service for the city in 2021, or as our recommendation would be to explore a shuttle service as part of the future transit plan that's going to be in the work plan in the future. And then there's also a third option, because Metro right now, they're kind of in flux and we won't have much known in terms of their changes in services due to COVID and other things that they're working on until this fall. And so a third option would be to begin pursuing a shuttle option at that point, and wanted to get council's input on that.
All right, shall we pause and do these one at a time? Would that work best for you?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. All right. Any thoughts on the various shuttle options that John laid out for us here? Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I had emailed in a question on this, which was around what actually could be done in terms of a shuttle that would be a fee-based shuttle. And so I thought first, if you could just summarize what is possible, because there is some sort of restrictions on that. And then also, I would like more information on, explore shuttle options, like what kind of shuttle options would we be exploring for option 1 on this slide. Thanks.
Yeah, for your question, Stephen, I'm going to phone a friend, since I know you're a lot more update on the detail, and like to see if you could help me answer Council President Hunt's question.
Yes, thank you for the question. So to help explain to council kind of the options, there is a state law that restricts the type of transit options that municipalities can explore. Primarily, it leaves the responsibilities of fixed transit service to the authorized transit agencies for a region or for the county, which is Sound Transit and King County Metro.
Hey, John, can you mute? I think we're getting a little feedback off of you.
I can mute, although I don't think it's...
You don't think it's you? All right. Sorry, Stephen.
That's okay. I want to make sure that you can hear me. So the options that we would be exploring would be limited based on trying not to compete with King County Metro and Sound Transit services. And so if we were to look at different options, we would go 2 different routes. One is to explore existing program options with King County Metro, similar to the Squawk-Tallis proposed projects through the Community Connections Program, which they call now the Flexible Services Program. And the other route would be to look at some type of contract service with a private transit provider, but they would be limited on what they would be able to do. Excuse me. So it really is limited based on the approach that we would go. Council President Hunt, does that help answer your question?
Well, maybe we would get more information through the exploration of shuttle options. But I know that there are some restrictions on, for instance, that the Highlands is working under as far as being able to charge fees. And so I think just understanding lessons learned from that, maybe as part of this exploration, would be helpful. And then what could we do, what would work, because these neighborhoods are underserved, not served by transit currently, and changing that would be a good thing.
Any other questions or comments about the shuttle options that are being presented this evening? Councilmember Hall. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember DeMichelle, and then Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DeMichelle. I guess overall, I would go with option number 1, just because as a former Metro employee, I know that I think that it is always good to have shovel-ready projects ready for them to look at, and be rather aggressive about moving forward and having outreach to them so that they remember that we're here. I'm also wondering, as part of that exploration, I mean, there is the possibility that we could partner with Metro. Is that correct, Steve? It wouldn't absolutely have to be our own shuttle. It could be a partnership with Metro. Am I correct?
That's correct, but the partnerships that Metro would be able to work with us on are fairly limited versus if we were to go on our own.
Okay, thank you. So at any rate, I would support, I think, number one, just because that would give us the opportunity while Metro is getting that more service information that they're expecting in the fall. It would give us the opportunity to at least explore some of the issues that have already been raised tonight and look at all of our options and at least know what we wanted out of that service. So that would be where I'd come down.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. This is Councilmember Hall. Just a quick clarifying question. So explore shuttle options. The way I was reading the packet, that essentially is what developing the transit plan is. So I guess could you differentiate between this first number one and number two?
I'll go ahead, Councilmember Hall. Number one is to explore just as an individual component of transit what we could do for a shuttle. Number two is to look at it holistically, to look at how transit would be throughout the whole city, including what Sound Transit's doing, Metro's doing, and some sort of shuttle service and how it all could fit together. And that's also why, from a staff point of view, that is our preferred one, and do understand the idea of getting ahead. But just in terms of being able to look at it holistically, that's what number two would do.
Deputy Council President Ray, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes, of course.
So if we were to, as a city, pursue option one, and then later, we get to a position where we can move forward with the transit plan, would the work that we did in option one fit nicely into whatever work would then come in option two? Or it's because it seems like you were saying, option two has benefits because you're thinking more holistically about the whole system. So I guess my question is, if we went with option one, would it fit nicely into option two once we eventually get there? Or do you foresee any complications?
I think it could. It is easier to look at the whole transit system rather than one component at it. But I think it could be useful for number two later.
Deputy Council President, if I may, this is Andrea Snyder, the Deputy City Administrator.
You certainly may.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Getting to the earlier questions, I think some of the distinctions between option one and option two, when we're talking about explore shuttle options, that's really for the city to explore that somewhat independent of our transit partners being ready for us to explore that. I think something that was in the packet about the transit update was talking about how our transit partners are really reevaluating the services that they are providing to the region, including the services that Issaquah has enjoyed in the past. And we have been seeing a decline in those services due to revenues and COVID cuts and all kinds of factors. This option number one would be exploring the shuttle options that the city of Issaquah could provide somewhat independently from our transit partners, because we feel that they're just not ready to talk to us about a shuttle option anytime soon.
in the city. So we would be doing some advanced work on that. Option number 2 would be really looking at how could a shuttle system fit within the larger transit system plan, as John Mortensen was saying. So that could more likely be coordinating with our transit partners like Metro. We started down that path with them a few years ago, and so it would be looking at what those options could be, really in coordination with our transit partners, but as part of a larger system planning. So I hope that helps provide a little bit more distinction between those two options and some of the inherent trade-offs between those two options.
Councilmember Hall?
Yeah, that definitely helped. Thank you very much. And I'll get back in line to provide comments.
Okay, great. Councilmember Martz?
Thank you, Council Deputy President. This is Councilmember Martz. I'm in favor of getting going on this. It is, I get a little depressed when I think about the fact that we as a community have been talking about this problem for over a decade. We wanted to get going on this over a decade ago. A decade is a very long time for 5,000 of the city's residents, really 7,000 if you include Tallis, to have zero representation in scheduled transit in and out of our communities. Squaw Mountain, as I said, 5,000 people, average 500 to 1,300 feet of vertical, so there's no way that people are going to hike down from the mountain to the transit center that's down in the valley. Our population is aging. It's becoming more and more important to provide more transportation options. So I'm in favor of getting going. I'm in favor of not waiting. If that means go it alone, I'd rather we just start into looking at what integrations look like and what our options are, and to put some real studied options in front of the council. But if the option to get going is option 1, then that's the one that I support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I just had a question about number 2, evaluate as part of a larger transit system planning. What's the timing for the transit system planning? I realize Andrea said that maybe there's been some delays in that. Those are my words. But I'm just wondering what the timeline, if we have any kind of a timeline for when we're going to start that planning.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to defer to Stephen to answer this one.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. Yes, there has been delays on when we were wanting to develop a transit plan. Right now, we would be looking at proposing as part of next year's budget. So the earliest we would be able to get started would be in 2022 at the earliest.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Any additional questions? And I'll loop around to see if there are any additional comments, but I wanted to see if we had any other questions first, because I have one, if no one else does. All right, I don't see any questions. What is the relative level of effort required to do 1 versus 2, and then possibly even 3? So is it the same level of effort and cost to do the 2 options, or how do they relate in terms of impact on city staff and other resources?
Thanks for the question, Stephen. I'll have you take this one as well.
Thank you for the question. So that level of effort, the transit plan is going to be a much larger effort, just because we'll need to hire a consultant to look at the transit system. The scope of that work is really to look at potentially restructuring how transit fits into our larger goals and long-term plans, as well as our short-term plans, to develop some type of capital projects to support the transit system. And so number 2 is a much larger effort. Option 1 is a smaller effort, but it's an effort that we would need to squeeze into our work plan for this year. And so we would need to work with the administration to figure out capacity for staff.
Thanks, Stephen. All right. Any additional comments that we'd like to provide guidance and direction on the Tallis-Squawk shuttle options. Councilmember DeMichelle.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DeMichelle. I just want to say that Councilmember March said what I was trying to say. He said it much more eloquently than I said it. And I totally agree with his comment. Let's get started. And so I just want to +1 his comments and reiterate that I think that number 1 is the one that helps us get started. We've talked about the Tallis and the Squawk shuttle, as Councilmember March said, for a long, long time. And we've got preliminary plans, and I think it's something that we can do. And I would like to see us get started as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall, and then Council President Hunt.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. This is Councilmember Hall. I'll add on to that. I think Councilmember Martz is right. Well, let me back up and first say that, I think personally I would prefer option 2 so we can work more collaboratively with our transit partners. And, we may find out there's an increased need as our partners reevaluate their routes. But I also think, the timeline of their planning isn't super clear, and there's probably some upfront work that we can do, which will then match up nicely down the line once they've done their planning on their end too. So I say, if it's not a huge undertaking, let's go with option 1. Let's explore away.
Thank you. Council President Hunt.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. I also support option 1. As I said, these are areas that have been underserved by transit for a long time and are not served by transit. And also, I do recall one of my first meetings as a council member, I had an infant at the time and lived on Squawk. And, I remember saying there aren't even sidewalks on a lot of Squawk, and it would be really great to have this shuttle option. So we have been, and that was 3 years ago, and my infant is now no longer in need of a stroller. So this has, been an issue for a long time. It continues to be neighborhoods that are not served by transit. So I would like to get going on this with option 1.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. I appreciate that this has absolutely been an issue for a long time, as have many of the things in the city. I'm just concerned with the idea of suggesting that we explore shuttle options as something that the city could fund. I think my question before even exploring, whether we want to do it is, how much is it going to cost us? So I would be of opinion that, unless I knew a range of what it was going to cost and that we could probably find it in the budget, I don't know. We've never taken on transit like this in the past. And so I have it in my head that it's super expensive, but maybe not. So I guess I'm cautious over exploring something if we're going to get a number and say, oh gosh, no, there's no way we can do that without help from transit partners. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh. Any additional comments? I don't see any. So I have some thoughts on this, and my first one very closely aligns with Councilmember Walsh in that I would like to explore the options for a shuttle, but I'd like to look at that first bullet, which is what would the service model look like and what would it cost. So before we go into great detail, I'd like to have kind of a high-level service model and the cost. And so the thing I like about option 1 is let's do that. What it would look like, what it would cost, because it doesn't appear, and we can get more information on this too, that this is something that Metro is likely to do. I know that it's something that they had talked about doing in the past, but I think if this is something we want, we need to understand what it is we're buying and how much it's going to cost. So I'm supportive of option number 1 also. Deputy Administrator Schneider, you have some comments to share?
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray and other council members for your feedback and discussion on this item. Staff will be prepared to return to council at a later study session. I believe we're looking at June to return to talk about some options and what the cost range for those options would be. because of course, different options that we explore are all going to have different costs associated with them. So we will be coming back to you with that information in early summertime. So thank you for your feedback on this one.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Administrator. I think you got the information you needed on this one. All right, John, move along.
Okay. All right. Next, I'm talking about the more items in the mobility work plan, and got these right here. The long-term funding for our larger capital projects. That item is on track. That we're reviewing finances for our capital projects right now. And in addition to that, we're making a very conscious effort to look for every grant opportunity to try and have external funding to help the city build out its mobility system. The near-term connections is also on track. That's the second objective in the mobility goal for the strategic plans. Is the city's strategic plan is to make near-term connections and efficiency to the mobility system. And out of that, there is a capital project called the Small Strategic Capital Project. That this is an annual project that we'll be doing for the first time this year, and it will be implemented in the third and fourth quarters of this year. The Regional Employers Transit Group, that one's on hold, and the reason is with the unknowns with our transit partners and so many people working from home that it doesn't make sense to proceed forward with this work item at this time. And then the final item on the mobility work plan is the traffic signals, which in addition to talking about different shuttle options and costs, when we return in June for the study session, we'll be presenting and discussing options for what we could do with our traffic signals and looking at new technologies for that. The next steps going forward is the June study session, right? We'll be returning to talk about the traffic signals, update the work plan, and to talk about the transit shuttle options. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any additional comments or questions?
John, thank you very much. Any additional questions or comments? I see Council Member Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. I didn't have any comment or any questions on the additional memos that weren't covered in the presentation, but I just wanted to note I very much appreciate those on the pavement management program, the transportation capital and transit. It was really useful to get a little bit more deep information on the approach for those. And yeah, very much thank you for those. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Hall. I actually wanted to say the same thing, so I'll just say it a little shorter. I thought that these were the gold standard of some memos that I've seen, and I just wanted to thank you very much for all the hard work. It was very informative and actually fascinating too, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. Similar refrain. I was expressed my interest in improved information over the last session, and this is a 100% improvement. Getting information ahead of time and all that information that we can read, digest, ask questions, and it's not just us. This is about the public. The public has no idea what we're going to talk about, and they hear it for the first time. How in the world do they know whether they should look at watch our meeting? What are they going to comment on? How should they be prepared? This is a 100% improvement, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? I am seeing none, so let's move on then to our next agenda item, which is ID 0753. No, it's not. It's ID 0818. It's the Master Mobility Plan, and we're going to bring back Stephen Padua to give us an update on that. Stephen. Oh, Hold on a second, Stephen. I need to, I missed public comment. Is there anyone on the call from the public who would like to comment on the last agenda item?
And I will just add, this is Tisha Geezer, Deputy Clerk. If you have interest in commenting on that last item, please press *3 on your phone. That's *3 to let us know you'd like to make comments. And I'm going to just quickly monitor the list here. And Deputy Council President Ray, I don't see that anyone is indicating a desire to speak on that last item.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Clerk. Right. Stephen, back to you. Thank you.
You're muted, Stephen.
Thank you. For tonight's discussion, I'll provide a brief overview of the proposed mobility master plan and implementation. For this discussion, the administration is looking for direction on how to proceed with the master plan. But before I get into the proposal, I just want to briefly give an overview of the background of the mobility master plan, which leads back all the way to 2015, when the City Council first discussed this as a priority item for the city to be working on, which eventually led to the development of the Transportation Advisory Board to support the work and the hiring of additional staff to be able to complete the work. And through 2019 and last year, the project team, which consisted of several staff and a consultant, worked with the advisory board through 3 phases of engagement to develop the major elements of the plan, which included the development of the vision through the guiding principles, followed by the goals and policies, as well as the strategies and actions with the project priorities. One of the main reasons we're here to talk about the master plan is to propose an adoption is because only the vision and goals and policies were formally adopted into the comprehensive plan last December. So to move forward with implementation, we're proposing the adoption of the strategies and actions. This is important now because when the transportation element in the comprehensive plan was amended last December, it set in motion a need to update several city policies for mobility. This year, we're preparing to update several policies, including the Complete Streets policy, one of the other items I'll speak to tonight, to be consistent with the vision and goals and policies developed through the mobility master plan. This is also important because most of the items that are identified on the work plan are directly tied to implementation of the master plan and the citywide strategic plan. And we plan to use that guidance from the master plan for our future work plans on mobility. So the proposal tonight is to adopt the mobility master plan strategies and actions to formally tie our work plans to the vision, goals, and policies in the comprehensive plan transportation element, and coordinate our work with the implementation of the citywide strategic plan. The options for your consideration include directing the administration to bring the master plan back for adoption as presented, propose final revisions prior to the plan adoption before we bring it back to council, or do not recommend proceeding with the adoption of the master plan at this time. The recommendation from the administration is to proceed with adoption of the mobility master plan as presented. And in terms of next steps, staff will bring back staff plans to bring back the master plan for consent agenda at the regular council meeting on March 15th. Following the proposed adoption, the administration will proceed with several items on the mobility work plan, which includes the amendments to the Complete Streets policy, which we'll discuss later tonight, the incorporation of the master plan into the process to develop the Transportation Improvement Program as part of this year's Capital Improvement Plan update. And lastly, it includes several updates to the street standards, which are a bit out of date. And to conclude this presentation, the administration is looking for direction on the proposed adoption of the master plan. And so I'm happy to take questions now.
Great. Any questions? We'll start with questions for Stephen on Mobility Master Plan? Okay. That looks like a no question. So with no questions, I'm going to see if there's anyone on the phone from the public who would like to provide comment on the Mobility Master Plan. And *3 to raise your hand. *3 to raise your hand.
And Deputy Council President Ray, I'm not seeing any hands raising to make comments on this item.
Okay. And then I meant to check in earlier with Council President Hunt to see if we had any emails possibly on this agenda item.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt, and yes, we did. We received an email that referenced this agenda item, and I am summarizing email comments that we've received while we're having virtual meetings. So we received one comment on the Mobility Master Plan, and the comment included appreciation for maps and information provided, also that there was a need for editing and that the TIP should be referenced in the TIP Transportation Improvement Program should be referenced, and also concern that the Master Mobility Plan hadn't gone to the Environmental Board for review. And that was the only comment that we received that referenced this item specifically.
Thank you, Council President. All right, any comments, or guidance, or direction we'd like to give the administration on the Mobility Master Plan? Councilmember Goodman is in with a question.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. So there was a question from the public about the Mobility Master Plan having not been to the Environmental Board for review, and I was wondering if we could get an explanation about what the reason is for it not going to the board. Or maybe there's a plan for it to go to the board, and I don't know about it.
We are actually planning to talk with the Environmental Board later this year as part of the Transportation Advisory Board's process to review the Mobility Master Plan. Because we had adopted the vision, goals, and policies as part of the comp plan, it kind of created a momentum to now move into implementation. And so we didn't want to wait on adoption of the master plan, even because we're planning to actually do an annual review process with the TAB as right now as we're moving through early implementation.
So so I missed whether the annual review process with the TAB would include the Environmental Board too?
Yes. I'm already coordinating with Megan on the timing of when to bring that to the Environmental Board.
The and the annual review, what does that, just briefly, do you know what all that encompasses? Like what kind of a review that is?
We'll reflect on kind of the work that the transportation group has taken on for this year and see if implementation or how we're moving through the development of the work plan and implementation is working with how the TAB originally kind of intended through the Mobility Master Plan.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments about Mobility Master Plan? No. Okay. So it does look like we have some public comment on this one.
Yes, Deputy Council President Ray, it appears that someone from the public was having some trouble raising their hand. So I'm going to, with your agreement, could we provide that individual an opportunity to comment now?
Absolutely love to hear what they have to say.
Okay. All right. So, Connie, I am going to send you a request to unmute now. You'll need to press *6 on your phone, and then if you've muted your phone, you'll also need to unmute that as well. And Looks like that was not successful, so I'm going to try that one more time. So, Ms. Marge, I'm going to send you a request to unmute. Maybe there's an issue with your phone connection right now, but let's try that one more time, pressing *6. Okay, that does not appear to be successful, so I'm going to recommend that Connie rejoin the meeting by phone, and we can make an attempt at the next comment opportunity.
I think that sounds like a good way to go forward. So aside from the public comment, which I would very much like to hear on this one, I did not see any additional comments or questions from the council, and that leads me to believe that the council is in support of the administration's plan to bring this forward for adoption on the 15th of March. I'm not seeing any. Councilmember Hall has a comment.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Hall. And don't worry, I snuck that comment in there right as you started saying there are no comments. So I cheated a little bit. I just wanted to say for direction's sake that I'm supportive of moving this forward and having it come back at the March meeting. I am glad to hear that sometime this year it will be presented and reviewed by the Environmental Board. And then I also just wanted to read one line that I got from the memo that stood out to me about the Mobility Master Plan, saying that it is, quote, an actionable and living document to be regularly reviewed by the Transportation Advisory Board for any necessary improvements. And I just think that summarizes it really well. It's a living document about the transportation needs of our community, and I'm eager to get the rest of it through and passed and move forward on our transportation priorities. So thank you.
Before I move on, are there any other people who'd like to sneak in a comment just before I move on to the next thing? Okay, Stephen, thank you, but I think we get to keep you around, don't we? All right, our next order of business is going to be ID 0753, amendments to IMC 12.10 complete streets, and we get to keep Stephen Cabuas, Senior Transportation Planner, around for this one. So Stephen, all of yours.
Thank you again. The next item tonight for discussion is to go over the proposed amendments to the city's complete streets policy. The purpose of this discussion is to brief council on the process to update the complete streets policy with the support of the Transportation Advisory Board, as well as with several staff that have helped Public Works kind of work through the need for the policy updates. The direction for this discussion, the administration is requesting feedback and direction on the proposed amendments, particularly two major changes on how we approach the complete streets policy, including changes to the approval of exemptions to be the responsibility of the city administrator instead of the Public Works Director, and identifying safety, access, and equity as priority performance metrics. To give a little background on this policy, I'll use a description for the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is a formalized group of transportation professionals throughout the nation that identified gold standards for what a complete street should look like and how it benefits the community. The coalition recommends this approach because it provides guidance on how to consider people and places in the transportation networks for our community. This approach ensures safe streets for people of all ages and abilities, and it does a great job of balancing the needs of all people, no matter their travel choices, but relates this work to other elements that create a more livable and vibrant community. In terms of how this policy relates to the city's vision, the Complete Streets policy is informed by the Mobility Master Plan and the transportation element in the comp plan. And the policy directly guides the city's street engineering standards, which is other elements that we're wanting to update as part of our work plan this year. So it's important that this policy has enough guidance to ensure the updates to the standards stay consistent with the city goals, as well as with modern best practices for how to build the desired mobility system that this community wants. Now, for our current policy, this is why we wanted to update city code, which is missing much of the needed guidance recommended by the National Coalition, so that staff can implement the complete streets approach that's called for in the Mobility Master Plan. The current policy is also missing guidance for identifying and processing exemptions, something that we regularly want to keep updated so that we're not that we're able to enforce the policy itself. And the last reason for updating at this time is to help guide updates to the street standards, but also it's important to note that the policy increases the city's eligibility for state funds through what's called the Complete Streets Rewards Program under the Transportation Improvement Board. There was supposed to be a call for the rewards last year, but due to the pandemic, it was postponed to this year. So this update is actually timely to put us in a better place to compete for these rewards. So the proposed new sections for the policy include all levels of information recommended by the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is how the state rewards program actually evaluates our policies as well as how we implement our policy itself. And we worked through each of these sections with the Transportation Advisory Board, and they spoke more directly on the vision and performance metrics in our discussions with the advisory board. And for the vision section, the board greatly appreciated the staff efforts to broaden the language on who this policy is for. In terms of identifying all ages and abilities was an important component to add to the language. When looking at the performance metrics, the board really appreciated the inclusion of equity as part of the as how we are measuring implementation of the policy. They recognized that more needs to be done to ensure Issaquah is an inclusive and comfortable community for all community members. And I added a new slide recently based on questions I received about the code changes, just to help describe what these new sections are doing for the code. So the list on the left are the addition of new sections that are actually helpful to staff to better understand what and who needs to be considered for implementing the policy. The list on the right is actually the sections that recognize current practice and operations to implement the policies. Since the state grant will be looking for this information, we wanted to make sure that it's formalized so we can get recognized for these ongoing efforts. One of the biggest changes being proposed in the new amendments is the authorization for exceptions. And because Complete Streets is a policy implemented by all city departments, the recommendation from the national group is that the authority should be as high a level as possible to elevate the importance of the policy and discourage non-compliance internally and externally. In the discussion with the Transportation Advisory Board on this topic, they agreed and supported the recommendation to change the role of approvals to the city administrator from the Public Works Director. For Council's consideration tonight, the options are proceed with the amendments as presented and bring it back to the March 15th Council meeting. Propose final revisions to the amendments before bringing back to Council meeting on March 15th, or don't proceed with the amendments at this time. In terms of impacts, these amendments have an impact on the city's eligibility for the state grant funding under the Transportation Improvement Board. The proposed amendments are consistent with the Mobility Master Plan and the newly adopted transportation element in the Comprehensive Plan. Lastly, the amendments do guide staff efforts to update the street standards, which are part of this year's work plan. And so we want to be able to apply best modern practices consistent with city goals. The administration recommends tonight proceeding with the amendments to the city code as presented. In terms of next steps, pending tonight's discussion, the administration plans to return to the March 15th regular council meeting to authorize the amendments.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Any questions or comments relative to Complete Streets? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I noticed something interesting that I haven't seen in any part of the code ever in 25 years, and that is definitions of mandatory language and permissive, the must, shall, will, should, and may, which I'm glad to see. My comment is about may. The definition of that is an interesting definition. And then when you do a search for may in the new proposed code, I'm not sure the definition of may works in the context where we have may in the code. I can see that where in some place, in at least one place, maybe might is better than a may. And so I applaud what I think what the intent here is to define these, but I think the way we have may defined, it actually could insert some ambiguity in here, which is what we don't want. So I would just suggest that you do a search for may and maybe talk with legal counsel and see if maybe we need to do some revisions. And that's my comment. Otherwise, I really like it. I know there's a public comment about the context sensitivity and interplay with the exceptions or the exemptions. I need to read that more carefully, but other than that, in the back of my mind, those two comments, I really like it. Thank you.
Any additional questions from council? Right, I am going to then, Councilmember Hall has a question.
Councilmember Hall here, I snuck in again, yeah. Just a quick question that you actually answered via email for another council member that I thought might be good to talk about on camera. Could you get into detail a little bit more about the importance behind changing the authorization of exemptions from the Public Works Director to City Administrator and why that could be advantageous?
Yeah, so because the Complete Streets policy needs to be actually implemented by all city departments, the recommendation from the National Coalition is that by elevating that authorization, it increases the importance of enforcing that policy for all city departments rather than Public Works Director trying to govern how other departments are operating and implementing the policies. And the other advantage to the elevation of the authority is that the TIB reward program, when they are evaluating their policy as part of the rewards, they are actually looking at that detail of who has the level of authority. And so not very many cities actually have updated their policies to go that route because it is more of a recent recommendation from the National Coalition. So that actually puts us at an advantage over several cities when looking at the rewards program.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Any additional questions? All right. I think I will go see if there's any additional public comment on this item. Star 3 to raise your hand. Learning.
Okay, and I do see a few hands raised on this topic. First, we're going to try Connie again. Connie, I'll request you unmute now. Press star 6, and then you may need to unmute your own phone. Here we go.
Okay, do we have success?
You did it.
Holy moly. So can I comment on all of them? Because I was going star 3 for everything, right? How do you want me to deal with that?
Oh, go ahead and comment on everything that we've covered so far. So mass mobility plans, complete streets, and the shuttle.
So we're gonna start with John's presentation on the transit. I barely even want to talk about because we've been working on that for 20 years, and we have made no progress, and I think you might have to blow up the Sound Transit Metro, which maybe COVID will do. So moving on from that to John's maps are awesome, but maybe 5 of us will see them. So what I would like to see is I would like to see a way for the public to be able to see the maps and what will be happening this year in some place like next door, because I think the city is totally blind to the citizens are blind to what is going on. You all might be able to see them, but I don't think there's an outward push. And then there's the small strategic capital projects, and maybe if I dove down into the CIP, I would know what those were, and I would be able to understand how they were chosen, and I could then be in the neighborhood where that might impact me positively. But seeing how I have no idea any of that, it would be nice to know. And then the citizens would like to know if something's going to happen in their neighborhood, and maybe they could have some positive impact and the city would look good. So I would ask for an outward push on all of that, because of course it is our town, and we like to know what's happening, but I don't feel like we do there. Okay. Then we're going to the mobility master plan. And I went to read the mobility master plan again yesterday, and I couldn't get past what the sort of editing, because words have meaning, and if the words are not in their correct places, then you don't know what the sentences mean. And so I got through maybe 8 pages again and went, this needs professional editing. It's not like it's going to change the content that I know of, but I can't even understand the content because the words and the sentences conflict with each other too often. So I wouldn't press this forward until you actually get a professional editor to smooth it out and make sure that it's saying what people intend it to say. And I didn't, if I spent another 20 hours of my life working on city stuff, I could probably help smooth it out, but I'm not being paid at all. So I'm voting for an editor. And then adding on to that, not going to the environmental board, my main contention with that is that they are setting criteria for choosing the projects to go on the TIP. And to choose the actual criteria, I think you need more than one voice. It went through the tab and it went through staff, but it needs more perspective than that. So I don't think that the criteria for choosing projects would be going to an update. And that, I think, just went to tab last week. And I think it's important to have that balance. So I resist the idea that there's not enough time to go to the the environmental board with that and discuss how much emphasis environment and environmental protection should have when trying to choose what projects to do, which then leads me straight to the complete streets. And I come at complete streets as a person for who the last 20 years has ground down through the code and watched the very ungainly way that the city has tried to interface with public and private projects and exemptions. And if you do not have criteria with meaning and structure about them, and I'm going to use the climate criteria for exemptions, do we actually have any language in our climate language that would be able to provide a substantive criteria for whether to or not do a complete street? And I posit that we don't. So that doesn't have any meaning if you don't actually have detailed criteria that you go through that will give you an ability to say yes or no on some legal basis. And so when you get down to the sort of the neighborhood context thing, you have exemptions or exceptions, whichever way you want to look at them, and it goes boom, boom, boom. Your city administrator has to walk through these, and if they don't fit these, you can't. And then a few paragraphs later, it says, yeah, but we want to be flexible. And I don't understand how you can be flexible without somehow including standards or criteria for those flexibilities in your exemptions. Because by being flexible, that means you are not doing something. And so ever hovering in the back of my mind for complete streets is the scenario of 3rd Avenue Bridge and Holly Street. If we build complete streets through these areas that would actually allow cars, you could eviscerate neighborhoods. And so talk to me about how it would work in reality if the city yet again comes up with the bright bulb idea that it wants cars to go through somebody's neighborhood. And is this code going to do the right thing by the community in its use? And I got to say, from reading the code, I cannot say that it would. And so I would hold this back and start ask for some potentials that we have had over and over. We had Newport Way to flow through the complete streets to see how this code would respond to actuals that we've had in the past, and see if it would solve the problems so that you don't have 100 people at a council meeting upset and all cranky because you might hurt their neighborhood. Okay, so I think I'm done. Thank you very much for suffering through the long-winded comments there.
Connie, thank you for your always for your comments. Deputy Clerk, do we have any other public comment on this item?
Yes, we do. I see that Ann Fletcher also has her hand raised. And Ann, I'll request you unmute now. Please press *6 on your phone. Ann, you appear to be unmuted from our end, but we're not hearing you. You may also need to unmute your own phone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sound great, Ann.
Great, thank you for that tip. All right, I just have a quick comment. It has to do with the complete streets exceptions, number F, where the establishment of a new facility would be contrary to the city's environmental goals to address climate change. And I do appreciate the good intent there to protect the environment and address climate change. And I was wondering if there was a reference to a specific plan or policy for environmental goals, or is this, or does this more reference any goals that might be created in the future on climate change? And I wasn't quite sure. It was a fairly general thing, and wanted to get a little bit more detail.
So, Ann, we can follow up with you offline and address those questions.
Great.
For you.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Deputy Clerk, any other individuals wishing to comment on this item this evening?
No.
Great. Thank you for that input. Council President Hunt, did we have any emails on this topic of complete streets?
Thank you. We did receive a email that referenced this item, but the speaker also spoke to it directly, so no additional public comments by email.
Thank you. Looks like I have a question from Councilmember Goodman, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I have a question and a comment. So my question is, I think for Stephen, for this proposed code, have we taken this through a sort of like a sample project to see how it would work?
Yes, when we discussed the policy changes with the Transportation Advisory Board, and when we discussed this with staff from multiple departments, we did kind of use example projects when looking at how the code would be applied, and everybody agreed that it actually was the language and the use is exactly as intended in terms of wanting to push forward on complete streets approach as we implement the projects out of the mobility master plan, but also in the TIP.
Okay. And did we like sort of put it through that, how it would actually be used, or did we just sort of talk about it?
It was both. So we kind of went through the motions kind of in a workshop format of this is how this language we apply to a new project idea, and when a project moves to design, it's going to be referencing the street standards, which is being informed by the complete streets policy, and even furthermore, as finalization, as design and review for construction kind of goes into place, the complete streets policy is providing guidance throughout in terms of like communication and engagement with the community. That's one of the important language additions in the new sections when looking at how we are communicating our projects with the community, but also who is going to be benefiting from the projects as well.
Okay, thank you. And then the comment that I want to make is that particularly the language here and how it's used and how it reads seems to me to be markedly different than what we have in our code now. And I really welcome it. And so we have talked in the Title 18 ad hoc meeting about how we might be able to make our code read better, more easily read and understood. And I'm just really, other than the comments that I had before, I'm just really pleased with the direction that we're heading here. So thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions on complete streets? Councilmember Hall, I was just about to call on you.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Hall. I thought I might as well ask the question that we just heard in public comment under the exceptions part on page 285 of our packet for letter F. It says where the establishment of a new facility would be contrary to the city's environmental goals to address climate change. I just took that to mean any and all goals projects that have to do with climate change and not necessarily a reference to a specific document or set of. Is that accurate?
Councilmember Hall, yes, thank you for the question. The intent of that language is to stay broad because it was actually a last minute addition to the code amendments because when we first started this work, we didn't know about an environmental board being formed, and let alone the intent of having the environmental board develop action plans on climate change as well as sustainability work. And so we wanted to have this language in here to help enforce the work that the environmental board is going to be doing.
All right. Thank you. Any additional comments or questions on this? I am not seeing any. So in terms of summarizing the feedback, I think the most significant thing I really heard was the definition of the word may and the suggestion that the administration review the ordinance with the city attorney to make sure that the context in which may is used is appropriate. And Councilmember Goodman, is that consistent with your comment?
Yeah, it's pretty consistent with my comment. I'm just not sure that the definition is appropriate for, I don't think the definition is appropriate. I'm not sure that where may is used is the problem. I think the definition tries to do too much. That's my concern. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, I think that's it. Stephen, you have what you need from us?
I do, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for all of your work this evening and all of the good presentations. So we're going to move on now to our next agenda item, which is ID 0810, the Old Town Traffic Calming Update, and we have Senior Engineer Matt Ellis presenting this evening. Matt, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, council members. I am trying to share my screen. 1 second.
Matt, this is Tisha. If you go to the display settings button there, yep, display settings, right there in the PowerPoint, and there should be a drop down that says swap.
Thank you. There we go.
That looks good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, council members. Matt Ellis, Senior Engineer. I'm here tonight to talk about Old Town traffic calming improvements. And tonight, we're seeking direction on whether to proceed with 3 recommended improvements to minimize traffic impacts within the Old Town neighborhood and authorize the needed funding in a 2021 budget amendment using the school zone safety funds. So first, I'll give a quick background on the history of the Old Town traffic calming, also what we've heard from the community, and then I'll discuss the 3 proposed improvements, and then discuss timing and next steps. So as background, we've heard from residents for a number of years about traffic calming in Old Town, about speeding and people cutting through the neighborhood. In 2018 and 19, council authorized a pilot program to put in traffic calming measures, and that ultimately resulted in speed humps and 1 traffic circle in Old Town. We continue to hear from community that more was needed within the Old Town neighborhood to improve traffic calming. We had a community meeting on February 12th of 2020 to discuss options, and that was followed by a council meeting on the 25th. Since then, we've been developing plans. So what have we heard? We've heard many things, including extending school zones, concerns about speeding on 2nd Avenue, as well as within the neighborhood. We've heard about pedestrian safety, specifically students, and the need for improvements at the intersection of 2nd and Bush, and just overall visibility for pedestrians within the area. So we have 3 recommended improvements for the Old Town neighborhood. The first is a street lighting and crosswalk markings plan around the perimeter. Second is improvements to the intersection of 2nd and Bush. And then third is school crosswalk signage. And I'll go through all 3 of those options. So the first is street lighting and crosswalk markings. This picture is of 5th Avenue and Sunset, and as you can see, there's no crosswalk markings or street lighting at the intersection. So we want to improve that specifically around the perimeter of Old Town. So our crosswalks we would put crosswalk markings where there currently are none along Sunset, and then add street illumination at 5 intersections around the perimeter. And I'll show you where that is. Also, we are currently surveying this and designing the illumination placement. So here are the locations. We are looking at putting in street illumination at 6th Avenue as well as crosswalk markings. Fifth Avenue in Sunset, Fourth and Sunset, Andrews and Sunset, or Andrews and Second, and then Bush and Second. And Bush and Second would be a second or different option because that would also include other improvements. Our second plan is improvements to Second and Bush Street. This is a picture I took at the morning rush pre-COVID of the intersection of Second and Bush, and I think the community has definitely recommended some improvements be done to this intersection, and we concur there are some concerns and we can do some improvements. So our goal right now is to include bulb outs to widen our pedestrian path at the intersection, narrow the streets to slow down traffic. We improve drainage within the intersection to prevent flooding during major storm events. We'd include street lighting and improve signage around the intersection. So here is a photo of a schematic of our design so far. And that does include bulb outs at all intersections or at all corners. We did discuss this with the school district, and they provided a bus over the summer. We laid out the design using cones based off of direction from council from last year's study session, just to verify that the improvements we have put in would accommodate bus traffic. So this is the final layout that does accommodate bus traffic without impacting their movements, but will still reduce speeds and provide larger landings for the pedestrians. One thing that is not shown here is inclusion of rapid flashing beacons, which has been a request of the community. Right now, we are developing crossings guidelines and standards for the city. And one of those talking points is rapid flashing beacons, similar to the one that's on Sunset by City Hall. And right now, the standards that we are developing does not show them as a recommended improvement on 2-lane roadways. Primarily, they should be used for 3-lane roadways with lots of traffic, or at mid-block crossings or roundabouts, places like that. But that does not mean that we are not going to consider it at all. What our thought is that we would put in the infrastructure for a rapid flashing beacon, and then we would evaluate the improvements as they're shown here. And if more improvements are needed, we could put them in without removing infrastructure that we recently put in place. So the goal is to kind of have an incremental approach to this intersection without removing what we just put in and providing some benefit to the community. Lastly is the school crosswalk signage plan. I took an inventory of major crosswalks around the schools in an effort to extend school crossings further along our arterials. Basically, this is the intersection of Darst and Second, and it shows one crosswalk sign, but we would improve this with the school crosswalk signage. The goal would be to expand school crosswalk signage to about 1,000 feet outside of the school properties. We would replace existing signs and install new signs. All would be the fluorescent green crosswalk signs, and then install the warning signs in advance of those crossings. We would also install high visibility posts at all those crossings. So here is a location of the crossings that we identified as ones that need improved crosswalk signage. What this does not show is any improvements within the Old Town neighborhood. However, we are suggesting to purchase of a speed trailer, radar speed trailer that we could implement within the Old Town neighborhood and rotate where we see fit. There currently is one that is owned by the Issaquah Police Department, but it is in high demand. So our thought is that if we had one that is owned by Public Works, we could move it around where demand is needed. We could also utilize it to assist in traffic counts so we could verify where speeding is occurring and help reduce it on an on-demand basis. So, talking about next steps.
Matt, can we maybe take a couple of questions now?
Absolutely.
All right, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. There was the neighborhood meeting, the Old Town neighborhood meeting a couple of weeks ago,
Yes.
and one of their concerns still was speeding and other traffic concerns, even though school hasn't been in and a lot of traffic is not on the streets because of pandemic. Do we have any follow-up to that and how we're going to address those concerns aside from this plan? Because this plan was kind of in the works. Do we have anything that's directly addressing that?
Just for clarification, are you saying addressing the speeding within the neighborhood?
I think a couple of us were at that meeting. Their concerns are about speeding. They want to see more police there, more police presence. So in addition to this, I realize this is not necessarily directly part of your presentation, but for the people that might be listening to this, who attended that meeting and have these concerns, I just want to know and kind of want it on the record that we're following up. So my question is, and you may not know the answer, what are we doing to address those concerns?
We have not coordinated with the police yet, but we will definitely bring that up. It has been a unique year to do evaluations to determine what speeding has been occurring. We have not been putting traffic counts up just because it is a unique circumstance, and we don't feel that traffic counts that we put up in the roadway would reflect what we will see in the future. So we've been waiting until things kind of get back to a state of normalcy before we start putting counters out there to do the evaluation, but we will definitely follow up with the police.
Okay, so just to be clear and to be an advocate for the community, I don't think the community will care about any traffic counts. They're concerned about speeding, and the optics are just a little bit ironic that people can, and I work on 6th and Sunset, so I can watch it myself. People can speed down Sunset Way, they can speed down 2nd, and if the camera's not on, they're not going to get a ticket. But yet we have our police station 3 blocks away. So I don't think that that neighborhood is interested in further traffic counts. I think the neighborhood is interested in police taking an interest in that area and setting some cars there and stopping people like they did in my neighborhood earlier this week. So I think that's the ask. I don't think the ask is to do more speed counts. And so just a couple other people were there, a couple other council members were there. So, they can chime in if they think I'm misrepresenting what the community has said. But I would doubt that it's traffic counts. I think they just want more police presence from police who are 2 blocks away. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Council Deputy President. This is Councilmember Martz. 2 things. First, I would like to see traffic counts done for 2 reasons. One is the last time we did traffic counts, it was a little bit controversial because the consensus from the IPD was that some of the concerns in the community weren't showing up in the traditional ways that you measure speeding on some of these thoroughfares. So as an elected, I would like to know what speeding is occurring. And the second, and perhaps more important, is once we start doing changes, I'd really like to see before and after and understand what the impact of these changes will have on the community. The second point I wanted to make is that at 2nd and Darst, there's a particular concern. So St. Michael's Episcopal Church has signage both on the west side of the intersection and on the southeast corner of the intersection. And the sign on the southeast corner is the main marquee sign for the church, but it's also very low slung because historically that intersection has been kind of a quiet, visually uninteresting intersection. And if you're going to put big crosswalks on both across the north and south side of that intersection. I think there's going to be an interest at St. Michael's to make sure that their signage, which is important. There's a certain number of folks who show up every Sunday morning who have never been there before and need to be able to find it. And it's tucked behind thick forest, and so that's going to be a concern when that intersection is done. And I encourage the city to talk to St. Michael's so that the last thing anybody would want is for St. Michael's to have to put a different, bigger marquee in as a result of all the visual stuff that's going to be going on around that intersection. People still need to be able to find the church. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thanks. This is Councilmember DiMichele, and I have a couple of questions. The first question has to do with those speed trailers that you were talking about, Matt. And I know enough about the speed trailers to possibly be dangerous. So my the question is, what happens if somebody is speeding and it displays up there that they're speeding? Are there any consequences? Is there anybody in the neighborhood who can watch that? What exactly happens with the data that's collected with those?
That's a good question. And we have not purchased one yet, but our goal is one that we could record speeds. So there would be no recourse from someone speeding, but we could then see historically what is occurring. So that way we can say, okay, yes, someone's been speeding at this time, and have that data. So it would, we could at least track it and then report it to the police if it is a concern.
Yeah, and that's been kind of my concern about those, because my experience at King County was that neighborhoods got very frustrated by the fact that you'd be recording 4 or 5 or 6 people speeding, but nothing happened, and you could have repeat offenders and nothing happened. And so sometimes those speed trailers, it's like they are promising too much to the community. Community thinks something's going to happen and then nothing happens. So that's a little bit of my concern with that. And then my other question relates to the question that I sent you earlier by email, and that is, traffic patterns are going to change. We did get an email from the superintendent of schools saying we've got 2 new schools opening in the fall, and that's going to take some traffic away from that area. The middle school and the new elementary school are both going to draw students from Clark and Issaquah Middle School. And so I am just, again, I guess I'll echo what Councilmember March said. It would be good to have traffic counts and to have a updated picture of what's going to happen there after COVID and all of the things that have happened to the school district's enrollment in the last year. Are we going to have a hybrid system going in the fall so that only half the kids are going? And those are all questions I know you can't answer and superintendent can't answer, but it makes a big difference on whether or not we are making a wise investment there with this project. There certainly are elements of the project I want to say that I think are absolutely necessary, like the lighting, and there are several really good parts of this proposal, and I really like it a lot. But I think I'd like to have more information about what's going on now that we've got the impacts of COVID. So thank you.
Councilmember Goodman, I will come back to you. I just want to give anybody who has not had a chance to ask a question a chance to ask, and then I'll come back to you, Councilmember Goodman, if that's okay. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody taking me up on my offer. So, Councilmember Goodman, your question?
That just means everybody wants to hear from me.
That's exactly it.
All right. Councilmember Goodman here. Hey, Matt, could you go back to the slide that shows what's going to be added to Sunset?
Sure.
Thank you. So the crosswalk and street lighting improvements. So the circle that's by 6th Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
that's not aligned. So the little green space there
Turn off the animation.
the little green space there to the east of 6th Avenue is that larger parking lot. So it's a parking lot that is across the street from the larger parking lot for the trail. And you can see that the orange circle shows where the improvements are going to be. That doesn't line up with where the parking occurs on the north side. So because I work in that building that's right next to that green space, I have this lovely view of everything that happens there, including people speeding off the hill that now can speed faster because there's not schools traffic, and I watch it. So my concern is that people run across that street all the time there. And so is there some way that potentially we can add signs or direct people to go down to that crosswalk to cross the street now that we're going to add something there? So that's something you can contemplate. But my concern is that people will not take the time to go across 6th and walk down, a half a block and cross that crosswalk. And so we still have a place there at 6th Avenue where people are jumping across the street when there's a lot of traffic that comes off that ramp pretty quickly. Thanks.
Great.
That's just you don't have to answer. I was just suggesting that you look at that, and you probably already know that. Thank you.
Thank you. And one clarification, we are not proposing crosswalks across Sunset at this point, because that would require some more lighting and more evaluation.
Okay, so that's just lighting there.
And crosswalks across the 6th Avenue intersection. So just where there's a stop bar or a stop sign. So it's mainly just to kind of highlight the crossings getting into the neighborhood.
So there's not a crosswalk across Sunset?
No.
That's not?
No.
Okay. Well, I misunderstood that. There should be. Thanks.
Right. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh, and if you can stay on this screen as well. I just realized that we're only talking about the Old Town neighborhood south of Sunset. Are we proposing any crosswalk improvements to 6th, 5th, and 3rd north of Sunset?
Not at this time. Budget is the main reason for that. We were mainly worried about conflict with pedestrians crossing the streets at this spot where we have more potential for cars cutting through the neighborhood, and focusing our energies at that point, just from a budgetary standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any additional questions for Matt around this? And I will let you finish your presentation then. All right. Take it home.
Oh, going the wrong direction. Okay, so timing and next steps. So the crosswalk signage plan, we could implement that soon. We can get our city staff, public works operations staff to install the crosswalk signs, and we can order the crosswalk trailer. So that is something we can do relatively quickly. The other two items, the Second and Bush improvements and then the street lighting projects, have some utility conflicts, so those could be constructed later in the year. So our goal is to finalize our design later in the summer as we deal with those utility conflicts. Following that is requested funding. So the Second and Bush improvements is about $400,000. The illumination and crosswalk plan, our illumination and crosswalk design is $200,000. That's primarily the street lights. And then the school zone crossing signage is $20,000. And that totals $620,000. And then looking at a summary of our school zone safety fund, this all comes out of that fund, which is revenue from the school zone camera. Our current fund balance is 1.5 million, and we are estimating revenue for the rest of 2021 of about $500,000. Right now, we have an adopted budget expenditures of 600,000. We are also have an anticipated budget amendment for the intersection of 43rd and East Lake Sam Parkway roundabout revisions for 123,000 additional funds for that, and that'll come in the next council meeting on the 16th. So after that, with the proposed Old Town traffic calming projects, our estimated expenditures would be little under 1.4 million, which would provide us with an ending fund balance of near $700,000 if we instituted all of these improvements.
All right, quick question from Councilmember Hall.
A very quick one. This is Councilmember Hall, and just to clarify that the mobile radar speed trailer would come out of the school zone crossing signage line here. Is that right?
That's correct. It doesn't have to, but that's a good portion of the $20,000 would be the trailer.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it was included in this.
Okay.
And so the direction needed is whether to proceed with the 3 recommended improvements to minimize traffic impacts within the Old Town neighborhood and authorize the needed funding in 2021 budget amendment using the school zone safety fund.
Thank you, Matt. Any final questions, or I will go and see if we have public comment. All right. Star 3 if you want to raise your hand and make public comment, and I'll let Deputy Clerk monitor that for a minute.
And this is Tisha. I do not see anyone from the public indicating a desire to speak on this item.
Okay, then I will move on. And Council President Hunt, do you have any emails that you'd like to share with us on this topic?
Yes, thank you. This is Council President Hunt. We did receive one email on this topic, and it was from a person who has experience being a crossing guard at the 2nd and Bush intersection. And so this person appreciated that the topic was coming back to council and indicated a willingness to share more information about notes and their experience being at crossing guard at that particular intersection, which is one of the ones that we're discussing this evening. And then also mentioned that currently the plan is for school to begin in that hybrid mode starting actually this week. That concludes comments on this item.
Thank you, Council President. All right, any additional questions or comments, guidance for administration on the Old Town traffic calming? I see Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. I am strongly in favor of making these changes. I think they are long overdue. We have heard the public impact of it, and I think we have the perfect money set aside, which will absolutely be useful in this situation. I just wish we had more money to add crosswalks across Sunset and to the north neighborhoods there as well. But given money is tight, I can appreciate the use on these very specific projects. Thank you.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I completely agree. This is exactly what this money is for, that we collect, and I wholeheartedly am in favor and look forward to these projects being added to the neighborhood. Thanks.
Any additional comments, Councilmember Hall? All right. Just to summarize, I think that the council is supportive of the plan as presented and would like to move forward with that at the next opportunity. So I think, Matt, we are done with that one, and thank you very much for your presentation. Always interesting and helpful. All right, we're going to move on to our last agenda item, which is ID 0827, electrical vehicle charging. Megan Curtis Murphy, Senior Sustainability Coordinator, is our scheduled presenter. I know there may be some issues, and we may have Autumn Monahan. Oh no, Megan is here. Great. All right, Megan, welcome, and you're on mute, and take it away.
All right, thank you. Good evening, council members. As you know, I'm Megan Curtis Murphy. I'm the Senior Sustainability Coordinator for the city, and I'm here this evening to talk about the electric vehicle proposal that I last presented on to council in January. So the purpose of the study session is to discuss the options and the administration's recommended changes to the proposed ordinance. I provided additional information in the memo on several topics, and we'll talk about the feedback that we received from the Planning Policy Commission and the Environmental Board. So this evening, we're looking for direction from the council on the overall proposal, but especially on the 3 recommended options proposed by the administration. The first is the removal of the $350 incentive program that was originally proposed for the single family and townhomes. The second is implementing a 50% reduction in EV requirements for affordable housing units. And the third is to not make any changes regarding the EV requirements for transit-oriented developments. Here's a quick reminder about some of the reasons that we're proposing the EV ordinance now. The city is committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and increasing electric vehicle use in our region will help us move closer to those goals. The city also has 2 plans, the Sustainable Building Action Strategy and the Mobility Master Plan, that include policies and strategies around expanding the use of electric vehicles through code updates. EV codes and requirements were also identified by the community as a priority at the community convening on climate last year. And in response, the council requested a proposal to come for discussion. And lastly, and relatively new in the media since our last discussion in January, that there's been a lot of talk at the federal level and in the business world about electric vehicles. And 2 of the major car manufacturers have recently committed to increasing EV production, and the Biden administration plans to invest heavily in electric vehicles. So by acting on the ordinance now, we'll be preparing our buildings and our residents for this increase in electric vehicles that are coming to market. So thus far, the administration has received feedback on the proposed ordinance from the council, the Public Policy Commission, the Environmental Board, and members of the public. A summary matrix of the main points of discussion was included in the agenda packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that as well. So overall, most people believe the EV requirement percentages for multifamily and commercial buildings are a good starting point, but there were a few that asked for increases in requirements. Next, the city had proposed an incentive for single family and townhomes, since the majority of people charge at home. However, there was very little support for this, and most comments urged the city to require EV readiness in single families if legally feasible. One reason against the incentive program was that builders should already be including EV infrastructure in their project. Another that we heard was that single-family home incentives may not be the best use of city dollars, and maybe it should go where it's needed more. The majority of the feedback on affordable housing was that the city should not waive the EV requirements. As I discussed last time, EVs are getting cheaper to buy and own, and could be a good way for people to get around who aren't able to live near transit or whose work schedules do not accommodate transit schedules. So instead, most people supported either full or reduced requirements for affordable housing to ensure equitable access to EVs. Lastly, there was little support for exempting TOD requirements from the PPC meeting and the environmental board meetings. And there was additional feedback in the packet, but these were the main takeaways from the meeting. The table on this slide is an overview of the percentages of EV infrastructure that was included in the proposal. And just a reminder that EV ready means that there's a 240 volt circuit that would allow for a charger to be hooked up, and EVSE, or electric vehicle supply equipment, includes the charging equipment itself, thus allowing someone to plug right in. So overall, the percentages are higher in multifamily than commercial, since the majority of people charge at home. However, commercial charging is also an important piece of the puzzle. And last, there are requirements for both new construction and existing buildings going through a substantial improvement, and also some for parking lots and parking garages. Now we'll start talking about the options that the city can take with the proposed ordinance. The first topic is single-family incentive options. The original proposal includes a $350 incentive for single-family and townhome residents for installing EV infrastructure. And so the city considered a few options here. The first is to keep the incentive as is. The second is to modify the incentive program. And the third is to remove the single-family incentive program. So the administration recommends option 3, to remove the incentive program, due to the feedback that we received and not getting a lot of support for this program. As you know, there's a lot of interest in pursuing single-family requirements in the ordinance, so the city attorney has joined us to answer any questions on this following the presentation.
Hey, Megan, we have a question from Councilmember Michelle.
Sure.
Thank you, Megan. This is Councilmember Michelle. So when you say number 2, modify the single-family incentive program, tell me what the discussion involved. Was that to increase the incentive, lower the incentive? What was that discussion around modifying?
Overall, I think that's just if council felt that either the incentive was just a little bit too high and wanted to reduce it. We didn't have a specific proposal around that. So that was just if council wanted to pick some sort of modification to it.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I don't see any other questions.
All right, great. So the city attorney also provided a memo about single family requirements that was included in the agenda packet earlier today. So we also heard at the PPC and environmental board meeting that if we're not able to have EV readiness, that they would want other options explored, including pursuing an amendment to the State Building Code Council or working with other partners on state legislation. The second topic of discussion was on affordable housing. In the original proposal, all EV infrastructure requirements are waived in affordable housing units. Based on the feedback, the city is... Mm-hmm.
Megan, I'm going to stop you. I think we have one more question on single family before you march on. Councilmember Martz?
Yeah, thank you, Council Deputy President. This is Councilmember Martz. So one of the comments in the packet is most comments were in support of having requirements instead of incentives for single family homes if possible. So can you go back a slide? Hello? Was my internet going out? Is that me?
Nope, sorry, I heard you. I'm back a slide. Okay. I was just on mute.
So it seems like there's community support for something. So, it's like the community support wasn't not for an incentive program because people didn't think we should do something. It sounds like the community support was for really doing something, and they were for doing requirements, and the city is going, has a legal opinion on that. It seems like option 3 doesn't reflect what the city heard from the community, right? The community wanted something; they just wanted more, right? And we're talking about giving them less.
I think what I mostly heard from the community was that In looking at incentive dollars, they would want that to be going towards the greatest need. And it seemed like I was hearing that was not necessarily single family, that if incentives were going to other purposes like affordable housing or other things. But it seemed like single family homes have perhaps more ability to install charging on their own rather than maybe affordable housing or multifamily. So it seemed like there was not an interest in providing additional city dollars to this group. So that's why this one was just to remove that.
Okay, I'm reacting to at the bottom of page 6. Bottom of page 6 of the packet. Most comments were in support of having requirements instead of incentives for single-family homes if possible. So specifically for single-family homes, the feedback was to have requirements, which I realize is not the administration's recommendation, but it seems like going to neither incentives nor requirements is not is not supported by the sentence that I just read out of our packet.
I think what I was hearing was that there just wasn't really that desire to have the incentives. So as you mentioned, a lot of the comments that we heard really were, I wish we could require this. If it's politically feasible, then we want to make sure we can do that. If not, then we want to try to find other options. But I think that conversation, as far as I was understanding in the previous meetings, was that was really different from them wanting or not wanting incentives.
Okay. Is that referenced in the packet? Is there support in the written materials for that? Because it feels like I read this and I read that the community wants us to do something to promote EVs in single family homes. And what they really wanted was the thing that the administration doesn't want to give them. So now we're going to recommend doing neither.
So I think I tried to express it a little bit in the feedback matrix under some of the comments that I was hearing. So I tried to document the comments from each of the meetings by each of the topics. So a couple that are expressed for the single family incentive one was that in the planning policy committee, we are hearing that they are hesitant to provide incentives to single family projects, try to explore incentives for other needed purposes. And there was some similar comments in the environmental board meeting too. So I was overall hearing not wanting to provide incentives for single family.
All right. Thank you.
I apologize if that wasn't clear in the documents.
Okay. Any more questions on single family before we move on to the next section? All right, Megan.
All right. So for affordable housing, so in the original proposal, all EV infrastructure requirements were waived for affordable housing units. And then based on feedback, the city is presenting 4 options here. Option 1 is to keep the affordable housing waiver. Option 2 is to have a 50% reduction in EV infrastructure requirements. Option 3 is to remove the EVSE, that's the charging station requirement, but keep the EV ready requirements. And option 4 is to take away the waiver for affordable housing. So here the administration recommends option 2.
Megan, I got one more question from Councilmember Walsh. I think this is directed to the city attorney.
Thank you. I was just going to make sure that other people were muting. I was hearing some background noise coming through, but okay, I think
okay, we're good.
Yep.
My mistake. Okay, sorry, Megan.
No problem. So for here, the administration is recommending option 2, the 50% reduction in EV requirements. So this would help balance both the additional cost to affordable housing projects as well as the equity concerns that were raised at the previous meetings. The second option would still provide some EV chargers right away, whereas the third option would only have EV-ready infrastructure. So then going and adding a charger might still be a future barrier to getting EV infrastructure and affordable housing.
All right, let's pause for a second and see if we have any questions on the affordable housing options. I'm not seeing any. Let's move on.
Okay, the last topic is the transit-oriented development projects. So in the original proposal, TODs were included in the EV requirements for the ordinance. So option 1 is to not make any changes, so the TODs must comply with the ordinance. And option 2 is to reduce requirements for TODs. And the administration recommends option 1, requiring TODs to follow the EV requirements. So although TODs are primarily encouraging the use of transit, people will still have cars, and we don't want to place barriers on EV ownership. And there's also little support that we heard in the meetings to waive requirements for TOD projects. And I can pause there for a moment if you want.
Let's see if we have any questions about TOD. Not seeing any, but I have one. Oh, Councilmember DiMichele, you get to go first.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Megan so much for the work she did on that complicated question that I asked. And I will just, let's see here if I can find it, because it took me a while to formulate it myself. So my question was, if King County provides reduced parking requirements for TOD projects to incentivize transit use, biking, walking, and then the city reduces the required EFSC and EV-ready requirements by 50%, then do we know the exact impact, number of stalls and financial obligations on the TOD OC project? And I know that there wasn't enough time to formulate a final answer on that, but I think my point there was that the TOD project is in effect getting 2 waivers. Am I being correct in that? They're getting the TOD reduction, and they're getting also our city reduction of 50% for the affordable housing units that they have. Not all the units in that project will be affordable housing, but there will be about half of them will be affordable housing. So they'll get the reductions for those units. So I know it's a complicated question, but basically, is that correct that they're going to get actually two reductions in their requirements?
I'm not sure if I'm clear on the 2 reductions. So the first reduction, so they would get a reduction in the requirements for all the affordable units. So whatever % of parking is associated with the affordable units, those would have a 50% reduction in requirement. Was the other incentive the parking one that you were referring to?
I believe I read that the TOD projects in King County, so this must be a King County regulation, get a reduced number of parking stalls because they want to incentivize using transit, biking, and walking. And so they actually reduce the requirements for the number of parking stalls. So that was, so in effect, they get a reduction and then another reduction on top of that.
Yeah, so this is Megan again. So it's my understanding, so that is actually city code that allows for the reduced parking there. And that is specifically because it's located a certain distance to the transit center. I want to say 300 feet or something might be the specific distance there. So that's because of the specific location. So I think it's not as much as an incentive as it is just following the code there, but it does acknowledge it being close to the transit center. So that's why it has reduced parking there.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Andrea wanted to add anything to that.
Thank you, Megan. This is Andrea Snyder. I'll confirm what you said, that it's true. When we look at the required parking for a project, we do follow right-sized parking. That's something that the county references as well. And so for a TOD project, it is something that we look at as how close and proximate the project is to transit. TOD, meaning transit-oriented development. So that is something we look at, as well as reducing parking for affordable housing. As City Council may recall, this project would be something that's subject to a development agreement. And so parking is one of the subjects that I think we would anticipate discussing further in the development agreement process.
Oh, I appreciate that. And again, I appreciate the hard work that was done on a very complicated question. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
So I have a question. Here you reference TOD projects, plural. So are we in? So when I originally had thought about this, I was contemplating TOD project, the current one that we are in the midst of developing. Are you also saying that this could be, there could be other TOD projects and they would be required to comply with this ordinance too? Is that where you're going? So it's the current project plus any future ones?
Correct. Yeah. So we're not specifying, current versus future projects. We're just looking at TOD projects as a whole. So whether there's future ones, around either the transit stations, around a future light rail station. So this would just be looking at or treating all TODs the same in the ordinance.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on TOD, or shall we move on? All right, let's move on.
Okay. So after discussing the proposal and recommendations, there's a few options before the council this evening. So one option is to proceed with the EV ordinance with the administration's recommended changes. Another option is to propose revisions to the recommended changes for the EV ordinance. And the third option is to not continue work on the EV ordinance at this time. Our recommendation to council is to proceed with the EV ordinance and incorporate the administration's recommended changes. And here's a timeline showing the tentative next steps for the EV proposal, as well as the previous meeting dates, just for reference. So the next meeting would be the Environmental Board in March for a formal recommendation on the proposal. Then it would go back to PPC on March 25th for a public hearing, followed by council on April 5th for final action.
I think Council Member Goodman has a question.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. So, Megan, can you go back one slide? So I'm wondering if we need to add one more stop here on the subway line. The EV charging code has always been anticipated to be included in the Title 18 update. And the ad hoc committee has met for quite a while about this, and the last update to the council on Title 18 was in mid-October, and it showed that Title 18 was in that outcomes chart. And I don't believe we ever talked about pulling it out of Title 18 and doing it sort of bypassing the ad hoc. So I'm wondering if we need to add onto this chart here that the EV charging station code, this topic should come before the Title 18 ad hoc. And the reason I suggest that is because, one of the things that the ad hoc committee is concerned with, and one of the topics that the council will have to think about is how you consider different priorities in the ad hoc code, in the Title 18 code, and how you balance priorities. And if you pull something out as a one-off, then we are de facto saying that this is the most important thing in Title 18. We need to pull that out. And I don't know whether it is or whether it isn't. I just raised the question of whether it should at least come before the ad hoc somewhere between now and the tentative council action. So the ad hoc committee can at least discuss amongst themselves anything that the council should be considering about pulling this out separately from Title 18 updates.
This is Megan. We did have it as also as a separate item in our citywide work plan. So I think it was listed under some of the ad hoc items as a general sustainable building piece, as we listed a few examples there, but it was also called out as a specific item in that citywide work plan. And then we also wanted to start work on it in response to the community at the community convening on climate, wanting to bring something forward, start acting right away. So we started work on this item for those reasons.
Sure, I understand how this got to be requested as part of a study session just a week or two after we had the Title 18 update to the council. But my question is really for the rest of the council members, and whether or not it would be a good idea to at least run it through ad hoc, so the ad hoc can at least consider whether there are other things that the council should be considering, because now it's on a parallel track, and we're not discussing any of the potential things that the council should be thinking about, just maybe cumulatively with other code changes that might be coming through the Title 18 update. And I don't know what those would be. It just seems odd to me that we just pulled something out and we haven't even discussed whether there should be a discussion by ad hoc about what even the council should be thinking about. That's all. I don't have any specific things. It just seems odd to me that it's on a parallel track and it's not meeting up with a Title 18 ad hoc, and that's what we have the ad hoc for.
So given that the Title 18 ad hoc is a artifact of the council, I would like to get the council's thoughts on Councilmember Goodman's comments. And I also, before I do that, though, I'm going to go to Council President Hunt, who has a comment, and then we'll open it up to the rest.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I am responding to the comment question made by Councilmember Goodman. And I also am one of the council members that is serving on the ad hoc committee. And I see that there are also going to be public comments, but I did just want to briefly, since the comment was just made about the ad hoc committee, make one comment in response. So I think that we did identify a bunch of policies as the ad hoc committee did our work. We identified a bunch of policies that were going to need additional work by the council and with the community and going through various committees. And so this is one of those that we knew and identified as one of the meaty topics that was going to need additional work, and it wasn't just something that would be reformatted as part of something that a consultant could do, for instance, looking at Title 18, which is our land use code. So for me, I am neutral on whether this goes to ad hoc. I think it is one of the it is something that we could consider as part of the process and see what the ad hoc thinks about it. We have a meeting that was canceled this week, but we could maybe reschedule that and meet this week, for instance. So I'm neutral on that, but I do think that, in my opinion, we anticipated that items would need to be moving forward that were policy decisions, and they would need to move in parallel to the work that was being done by consultants on the reformatting of Title 18.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on ad hoc? Oh, Councilmember Hall.
Thanks, Deputy Council President. This is Councilmember Hall. I guess I'll say I'm also somewhat neutral about whether or not it goes to the ad hoc committee. My only concern would be if it delays council action by a lot. I think early April is still a good goal to aim for council action on this. And I guess the way I'm thinking about this is it's not necessarily that I think of this as the most important effort within Title 18, but I do believe that this moment in time calls on us to act kind of quickly in this space. Megan said earlier that, we've got a wave of electric vehicles coming. Our state and federal leaders are working a lot in this space, which is an indication to me that we should be acting quickly as well. So whether or not it goes through ad hoc is fine with me, but I just would not like to see this delayed very long. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Council Deputy President. I don't think it needs to go back to ad hoc. I think, when I thought of ad hoc, I thought of a group going off to do a bunch of crunching on a bunch of important topics, like has just been done on this topic, right? I think that this has been a well-researched topic, and we have gone out and sought engagement in the community, and we've sort of done all the stuff more probably than we're going to do on other topics that might be in Title 18. And so I agree with Councilmember Hall. There's some urgency. I also think that the last time Council talked to the administration, we said, here's the path we'd like to see for this process. And I would be, I don't see a need to change that. I think we set that path out last time. I'd like to finish it up and get it back before full council. Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh, also a member of the ad hoc. And I think what this brings up for us is the concept of, yes, we're going to make changes to code that we will then have to kind of figure out how it all meshes together when we are working on the completion of the Title 18 rewrite. And so I would just put this as a feather in our bonnet over something that Title 18 ad hoc needs to discuss, but not in the sense of taking this particular action to ad hoc, more just a, hey, this is another note of something that we need to be in consideration. So that's my opinion.
Any other thoughts on engaging ad hoc in this discussion? I will opine as the chair, and it is, I believe it. Oh no, I won't opine as the chair. I will let Councilmember DiMichele share her comments, and then I will.
I'll be very brief. This is Councilmember DiMichele. I think I agree with the idea that there's an urgency, and I am sort of neutral. If the ad hoc committee wants to take this back up, that's fine, but I don't want it to delay the march that we're taking toward an April 5th council action. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. So my thinking was very much along the lines of Councilmember DiMichele. If the ad hoc wants to address that, I think that is within your purview to say we'd like to have a meeting and address that, and I think you should if there's consensus among the three of you to do that. But I also agree that unless there is some extenuating situation or circumstance, we would not want to push out final action on this beyond the April date. So hearing no really sort of opinions on both sides, but unless there's objection, and I know Councilmember Martz expressed an exemption, mine would be to leave that decision up to the committee itself. Councilmember Goodman, you have a comment.
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Councilmember Goodman here. And just to be clear, because there were several comments made about delay, I specifically said before April, just to be clear. There was never a suggestion of any kind of a delay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Martz, would you have objection to the ad hoc Title 18 committee convening, and if they so desire, and having a discussion about this?
It sounds like the body would like to go in that direction, and if I still maintain that we set out a path last time, and I generally am sensitive to, if Wally were here, I'm sure Wally would be saying something about, the council and the path we take, but it sounds like the rest of the body is fine with it going to committee, and so thus I'm okay with it as well.
And I think if the committee wants to take it up, the committee should be, should see this within their existing charter to do that. All right. I think we've got that resolved. Are there any other questions? And before I go to public comment, I know this is a topic of great interest to a lot of people. So I'm not seeing any. So
Councilmember Ray, I just had one last slide.
Geez. Do you want to finish your presentation?
It's only one slide, so.
Yes, please.
Just the direction needed slide. So probably just these are the three things that we are looking to hear about from this evening, as well as if there's anything else that the council members want to bring up. But again, the three recommendations that the administration has brought forward this evening, and we're looking forward to answering questions and going into discussion. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Great presentation. And also, I was going to ask you if you could put up the summary slide. Actually, can you leave the summary slide up? I think that would be helpful as we go into discussion. And then I'm going to turn to our city clerk and see if we have anybody who has raised their hand and would like to comment on this topic.
Yes, I know that we have one individual who's been waiting to make comments here, and if there's anyone else on the line who'd like to make comments, please press *3 on your phone. And now, Leah, I'm going to go ahead and send you a request to unmute. You'll need to press *6 on your phone, and then you may also need to unmute your phone if you've muted it as well.
Hi, good evening, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Leah Missick. I work for Climate Solutions, a regional clean energy nonprofit with the mission of accelerating clean energy solutions to the climate crisis. And I also participated in Issaquah's community convening on climate. And yeah, I'm here to comment on the proposed electric vehicle ready ordinance. So we're really excited to see this type of ordinance being considered, and I want to thank staff for their work to bring this forward. We need to electrify our vehicles in order to meet Issaquah's climate goals. Happily, there's a lot of momentum on this front. EVs will achieve upfront cost parity in a few years. They're much cheaper to operate. State policy is promoting vehicle electrification. Puget Sound Energy is working on a transportation electrification plan. And as Megan mentioned, federal and business action is occurring as well. It's worth noting that GM just said it will exclusively produce electric vehicles by 2035. So therefore, we need to ensure that we're taking simple but important actions to ensure this transition is not hindered. Not having a place to charge at home is consistently right now cited as one of the main barriers to purchasing an EV. So we strongly support an EV readiness ordinance, and I have some comments on details that are, in our view, critical to ensuring this ordinance is adequate and equitable, and our thoughts are largely aligned with the feedback that Megan shared that has already been received. So as I mentioned, I was a participant in Issaquah's community convening on climate. And again, what I heard was a strong desire for Issaquah to lead and act quickly. We only have about a decade to have our emissions. This EV readiness ordinance is an important step that really needs to be taken now without delay. So each year that we wait, the more people will be in buildings that will potentially require expensive retrofits to allow for adequate EV charging. And the buildings we build now last for decades, and they need to be future-proofed. So we shouldn't wait, and we would like to see this ordinance be passed as soon as possible so we can consider other important climate actions that will support the community, our health, and our future. We also believe that single-family homes and townhomes can and should be included in this ordinance. I understand that there are different interpretations as to what may or may not align with state law. I actually worked on the Clean Buildings Act along with the City of Seattle in support of it at the state level, who the city was simultaneously crafting their own EV readiness ordinance. So given that legal opinions are not consistent, I urge council to take the lead on this matter and enact what is the best possible policy. Seattle, a high-profile city, has not experienced legal challenges on this matter. We concur with the administration recommendation that single-family homes and townhomes should not be incentivized to be EV ready. In our view, such funds should be better directed to places where they would make more of a difference. So for example, we'd rather see those dollars being targeted toward charging access for affordable housing residents or toward public charging that's accessible by all community members, including those who currently lack home charging access. So we do not believe that EV readiness for single-family homes and townhomes should be incentivized. It should be required, and we think council should act on this. There were some questions about including EV readiness in transit-oriented development. We think that any building that already includes parking needs to future-proof that parking. So we support reducing parking minimums, especially near transit, so that greatly reduce building costs. But whenever parking is already being included, it should be able to accommodate EVs. So we agree with the administration recommendation of no change. We also don't believe that affordable housing should receive a waiver, since this creates a significant equity issue. As I mentioned, these buildings are going to be in place for decades, and in that time frame, EVs will become the predominant vehicle, and they're far cheaper to operate. So it's unfair for those living in affordable housing to be excluded from this opportunity. We do understand the cost concerns and certainly don't want to stymie development of affordable housing, but EV readiness is not a primary driver of construction costs, especially, again, when parking, which is expensive to build in and of itself, is being included in a building. So we suggest bringing down construction costs in other ways that would be far more impactful, rather than waiving EV readiness and setting up this equity issue. So just to reiterate, we think this is a really important policy that's a step along the way for Issaquah to meet its climate goals. It's a smart policy. EVs are a small percentage of vehicles in this moment, but that is about to change drastically, well within the early lifetime of new buildings. So we urge you to pass this ordinance without delay and to make it strong by requiring EV readiness for all building types. Thank you again for considering this important matter, and we look forward to working together to improve and implement this ordinance so it can provide a strong example for other cities throughout Washington. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Leah. City Clerk, anyone else asking to talk?
No.
Okay. Anybody want to hit star 3 and raise your hand? All right. Let us move on, and I will go now to Council President Hunt and see what we have in the way of emails on this topic.
Thank you. Yes, we did receive several emails on this topic since the last time that this topic was discussed by this council. We received one email that had questions around who pays for the electricity to the chargers, and I responded to that email with the answer to that question. And also in that email expressed that it was important that the capability be there and wired up and ready to go. We also received an email urging us to move forward and that waiting on this would not be responsible. Two emails from the same resident who, one urging us to fold this into the Title 18 land use discussions, and then another one also referencing salmon recovery and also referencing EV charging and asking about the priorities. And then lastly, a email from a resident urging Issaquah to move forward, urging the city to take a leadership role and to strengthen this over time, to work with the regional and with state partners to strengthen this over time. And I think that concludes the emailed summaries on these.
Great. Thank you, Council President Hunt. Comments and discussion about the 3 changes to the EV ordinance as proposed by the administration. Megan, you want to pop them back up for us? I think it'll help the discussion. So first, remove the incentive for single family and townhomes, a 50% reduction in EV requirements for affordable housing, and no changes to the TOD project. Councilmember Hunt, then Councilmember Hall, or Council President Hunt, then Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. And firstly, I wanted to thank the administration for doing a good job, I thought, summarizing all of the feedback that you received from multiple meetings with our volunteer commissions, and also the legal memo that was provided with our materials, which I think helps us all get on the same page about why the administration's recommendation is what it is regarding the first item, which is the single family and townhomes piece. So firstly, I understand why we would strongly consider the legal opinion that was provided to us. And so I take that very seriously. I do think there were recommendations from community members around, could we go to the building council, make sure that the state building council requests a change, or ask if this is interpretation if we would need a change. I recognize that this may not be likely, but I think a lot of cities are going to be looking at this. We had in our previous presentation information about several other cities that are also looking to have EV ordinances on a pretty near time horizon as well. And so I think with all of the other momentum, all of the companies that are going all electric, potential laws in the works about requiring electric vehicles, I think there's a lot of momentum. So I think working with other cities and working regionally to clarify and potentially change this issue around single family homes would be good. But I understand also that we have this current legal opinion that says that it's not currently advisable. I am in support of removing the incentives. I think that, as was said, this money could potentially be used differently. And I also am concerned about an incentive for this group, because a single family homeowner is potentially the person who could, if they own the single family home, they could potentially make this upgrade themselves, whereas that's probably not possible for somebody who's renting in a multifamily home. The townhomes is the particularly unfortunate situation there, because people are likely to be more likely to be renting, or the fourplex potentially likely to be renting, and then maybe you're in that middle. So I think it's worth pursuing. And I would like to find out more options about that. On the second one, the 50%, I appreciate all the information that was provided, but I still think it's an equity issue, and I would be in favor of not waiving the requirement on that. I think, unfortunately, it's not an apples to apples comparison with the park impact fees that it was compared to, because in this case, it's actually limiting the infrastructure that's available to the people that are living in the affordable housing. So I think that's an equity concern, and I would be in favor of not reducing that requirement. And then lastly, I'm in support of the no change for TOD. They already have a lower parking requirement, and also it's a very small, relative to the cost of building, and relative even to the cost of building the parking stall, it is a lower cost. And so I am in favor of C. And again, just wanted to say thank you for all the information provided. I realize this was a complicated topic, and I think the summarization of feedback from the community has been good, and it's been helpful to see that we've got a lot of enthusiasm from the community on going forward with this.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall here. +1 to that last part for sure. Thank you, Megan. Thank you for all the work you put into this. Truly appreciate it. All right, let's go through this list. Single family and townhome remove incentive program. Yes, please. I was uncomfortable with this proposal. Optimally, I would like to see the same requirement cover single family homes and townhomes. But that effort doesn't seem to be available to us at this time. And I guess we heard just now that legal opinions are varied in the space, but I would personally prefer to rely on our own legal counsel's opinion at this point. But I would like to start, just to echo a little bit the council president's comments too, I would like to start a conversation about how we can approach changing the state building code to allow cities to make this requirement. Maybe having a conversation regionally with other interested cities and with the King County Cities Climate Collaboration as well. For affordable housing, remove waiver and reduce requirements. I know it's not ideal, but I don't want to make affordable housing development too much more difficult than it currently is. So I am supportive of removing the waiver and reducing the requirements at this point. But I would in the future like to explore a potential incentive program in this space. I think if we're going to have an incentive program anywhere, I would want it to be here. And then TOD projects, no change. Yep, that sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh, and I will pretty much echo what you have heard before in agreement with the. I very much appreciate, Megan, how well you summarized the findings and the feedback from each of the community meetings. That was just phenomenal to see it all in a little chart, very easy to interpret. And so I would love to see all board feedback summarized in such a way from every board. But on the 3 points there, I agree with removing the incentives. I very much appreciate the legal memo, but I do strongly support regional or state action here, so that we can move forward, hopefully on having requirements for single family and townhomes. For the affordable housing, I'm also a little bit torn here. I think over a 50% reduction in the EV requirements, I would opt for removing the EVSE requirement and keeping the EV ready, just because the idea of having to tear up infrastructure in order to put that in is, from my mind, more of a barrier than having to buy the parts that are above ground that provide the actual electricity to the vehicles. Plus, those costs will likely go down as adoption increases. So I really want to make sure that we don't have to tear up infrastructure as much as possible. So I think the EV ready is really important there. And then for TOD projects, I agree with the administration's recommendation to not make any change. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DiMichele, and at the risk of repeating everybody else, I'm just going to say that I think it was attachment B was a beautiful grid that showed us all the comments from Planning Policy Commission and the Environmental Board, and even what I liked about it really was the council comments were also there, so we could just read across and see what people said on each thing. I thought it was beautifully done, and I agree with Councilmember Walsh. I'd love to see public comments summarized that way in the future for other reports. So on the direction needed, yes, and also thanks to Mr. Haney for his memo that I thought was very well written and clear about the requirements for or not requiring EVs for single family and townhomes. So I too feel that it was a persuasive memo and that we should follow those directions. On the 50% reduction in EV requirements for affordable housing units, one of my questions would be, should we consider the size of the projects? And the reason I'm asking is we have affordable housing developers who do great big projects and are probably very able to do 100% of the required amount. And then we have affordable housing developers who do smaller projects that might be 5 to 10 units, and so I'm just wondering, I'm just putting that out there, would it make sense for us to look at that 50% reduction for smaller projects that are perhaps on a more limited budget? So just a thought. And then I agree with the no change for TOD projects. And again, looking at the other incentives that we're giving for TOD projects, I believe there are other incentives, and I appreciate Deputy Council Administrator or Deputy City Administrator Snyder's comments about that we'll also be in the process of negotiating a development agreement there. So I agree with that. So overall, I think it's been just an outstanding presentation. I appreciate all of the information very, very much. I feel that the direction needed was laid out very clearly. And so I very much appreciate the work that's been done on this particular item. Thank you.
Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Council Deputy President. This is Councilmember Martz. So I think we should go with what the community has told us that we should do on this issue. I think on item A, we should make it a requirement of single-family development. It's the job of our legal counsel to minimize our legal risk. I get that, but we are a bold city. We have been bold in the past. While I've been on council, I've seen us be bold on a plastic bag ban, which I'm proud of, which we joined Seattle at the time. We were the only other city that did it when Seattle did it. We got picked on, Seattle got picked on. I don't always agree with Seattle, but I was proud of that vote. We were leaders on medical and recreational marijuana when there was questions about legal risk. We took a chance. It never came back to bite us. We did what we thought was right rather than minimizing potential risk. So I think when this comes back, I'd like to ask my fellow council members to consider following what the community has told us. I think if we go back and have neither an incentive nor a requirement, that's really not what we know in our hearts we want to see, and it's not also not what the community wants. So please consider that. And then on the other two, I think the community said no waiver for affordable housing and that TOD projects must comply with the ordinance. And so that's what I think too. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Any additional comments on the direction? Council President Hunt has a question.
Thank you. I do have a question. This will go to the Planning Policy Commission for a public hearing, and this is a process question about that. If it goes to that, and just for the sake of argument, if it goes to that commission with a 50% reduction in the waiver, and then I'm wondering if I'm wondering how different the ordinance that we adopt would have to be if we change things when we vote on it, if it would have to go back to planning policy, because I think we've had that before, and it sounds like there's still, even in this conversation, there were a few not majorly different variations on the 50% affordable, but there were a few different opinions. And so that's my question: is if we have options presented at the planning policy, would that help, or would we potentially just have to go back to planning policy for another hearing if we were to change that?
Deputy or Megan or Andrew, you want to fill that in?
I would love to have either Jim Haney address that because he's explained it to me so well, but does it better since he's on the call?
I'm sorry. Could you tell me again what you?
Yes, my question is around the process here. It will go to a public hearing. The ordinance will go to a public hearing at the planning policy, and I'm wondering around if we were to, for instance, change the reduction in affordable housing from what is seen at planning policy, would that be too much of a change to that it would have to go back to planning policy? What's the threshold for change there?
Well, the state law simply says that if you are making a change in something which is more than just a clarification or a explanatory type of change, and you are making a substantive change to the regulation which was not within the scope of the alternatives considered by the Planning Policy Commission, then you would have to hold your own public hearing before you could adopt it. You can adopt it, you just would need to hold an additional public hearing if it is a significant change.
Thank you. So I think that also answered part of my longer version of the question. So if we had a public hearing that included a couple of options, then those options would have been at the public hearing the first time, so we wouldn't need to go back to planning policy after deciding one of those options, right?
That's correct. If you have options and they're choosing among the options, then you would not have to go back because the hearing would have been held on the options.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? I will share my thoughts. I think removing the incentive for single family is the correct course of action. I'm not sure I want to make it a building code requirement or a land use requirement, but I do think we need to aggressively start working the political channels, which includes the Building Code Council, it includes the state legislature, it includes other entities and partnering regionally to push this forward, because quite honestly, if I was buying a brand new home and it didn't come wired for 220 in the garage, I would be very disappointed. So I think it's not only does it make good sense from a policy perspective, not only does it make good sense from an environmental perspective, it makes good sense from a business perspective. So I think we push on that. In terms of the affordable housing, I am in favor of removing the 50% reduction, and I think the argument around equity is pretty compelling. It's not fair to people who are living in affordable housing to have limited access to charging stations, because I do believe that we are going to become a much more electrified vehicle society. And then finally, I think on the TOD, we leave it as it is. So those are my 2 cents. And then if you will, I'll just do a quick summary. I think on the first question around single family, there was a general belief that an incentive didn't work. There was a preponderance of the council felt that working to move the issue forward with the Building Code Council or legislatively and in partnership with other regional entities made a lot of sense. But there's also the possibility of moving forward with a requirement and taking some bold moves and laying out a more aggressive stance in requiring it. In summary, I think the council is coalesced around the idea that single family should have access to charging capabilities. The only question is what's the best means of achieving that. I think that we were also generally in agreement on no reduction for affordable housing, but consider the option of looking at smaller affordable housing projects that would have a more of a cost burden for doing EV ready. And then also looking at maybe on affordable housing, changing the level of EV ready versus where they have service equipment attached. So some options to reduce the burden on affordable housing without reducing access to charging stations. And then I think we're all in agreement on the final one of no change for TOD developments. Any objection to that summarization? Okay. Let's see, Council President Hunt, do you have a comment?
Yes, and I think the summary was good. First of all, I wonder though if that is clear enough information for the administration on what we actually want to have in the ordinance that would be heard at the public hearing, and because I think there was not there were a couple options presented in what you said.
I'll turn then to Megan Curtis Murphy and ask Megan if she thinks she has what she needs to take this forward to the next level of review.
This is Megan. Thank you for that. Yes, I think that was a great summary of what was said. It does sound like there are a couple different thoughts specifically around the affordable housing. So whether we should have no waiver at all, or considering small projects, or doing more EV ready and less EVSE. So I think if there was any more consensus on that, then that would provide the next step. But if not, I think we can work within that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think it's important that we take this forward to Environmental Commission and PPC. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Hall. I just wanted to be clear that I had said that I was in favor of reducing the requirement for affordable housing. So I'm not, I think maybe you captured that, but I wasn't sure. So I guess there's kind of a menu of different options for that one. Yeah.
And I apologize, I missed that somehow. So there is an alternative, is that we do remain with the 50% reduction for affordable housing. That's another option. Thank you, Councilmember Hall. All right, I'm looking for any final comments on this one, and I am not seeing any, and I will then go to our last agenda item, which is good of the order. So do we have any, I think, for good of the order? And I see Council President Hunt does. Council President.
Sorry, I just chatted to the wrong person. So it was supposed to be a comment on the last item. I also was listening to council. I think there were a couple different stances on the affordable housing, but there also is there were at least two opinions on the single family. I don't think we heard from everybody on that, but I agree with Councilmember Martz that we have heard loud and clear from the community that they want that. And so I think it would be good to have that as an option at the public hearing, recognizing we do have this legal menu. And my thought on that is to continue to have it on our radar as something that we want to continue to get feedback on, and that we want to have as an option, recognizing that we do have this risk. And I also wanted to agree that, we've heard from the community that we could be a leader on this, and I think that's important because people do charge at home, and single family homes is a big part of our community.
All right, I'm gonna try this one more time. Any last comments on ED? Let me give you guys about 10 minutes to get those comments out there. All right, I'm going to move to our last agenda item, which is good of the order. Do we have anything for good of the order this evening? All right. Seeing nothing.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Nice, yes. Councilmember DiMichele and then Councilmember Hall. Councilmember DiMichele, please.
Thank you. I almost didn't remember to unmute. So I just wanted to kind of ask a question of everybody. There were a couple of emails in the last week or so. One of them was a person asking if we would support the King County proposed ban on fireworks. And another one was from one of our business leaders asking if we could expand our business grant to cover 501c4s and 501c6s. And so both of those interest me, but my question is, what is the process for bringing forward, if we want to bring something to the council for discussion, how, how as a council member do I do that? And does that then go to the leadership group and they decide whether it goes on the agenda? How does that happen? I just really would like some direction on that.
Council President, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to that. This is Council President Hunt, and then I think we should also, if the administration, if Deputy City Administrator Snyder has comments, then I think that would also be helpful just to have both sides. But I think that from my perspective, we've definitely had that question. I've had that question too, and we are planning on having a meeting in which we're going to discuss the rules of procedure and clarifications to things like how we bring forward items that are that individual council members or groups of council members want to bring forward and put on an agenda. So I think that tentatively that is something that we're going to talk about it at leadership tomorrow as well, I think, but would be upcoming within the next month or so, that we would have that on an agenda. And that also is something that we discussed at the retreat, and I think is a very necessary conversation. In the shorter term, we do have a couple options that are in our rules of procedure. One of them is to bring it up at go to the order and see if there's interest. And then there's another one, which is to have 3 council members bring it forward, and that one could be done in writing. And I think I have correctly summarized that, but I see that Council Deputy City Administrator Snyder is on to give a comment as well.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. I would have responded the same way. So I think there are some details that we need to discuss with council leadership, and then we can go from there. Thank you.
Councilmember Michelle, did that get to your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Councilmember Goodman has a comment.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. The other option is more of just a practical one and not a rules of procedure one. And one is to just ask the administration to provide sort of a information, ask, so Councilmember DiMichele or maybe others have questions about those things that you were talking about. And just to ask the administration generally what the options would be, and generally why or why not, what the options might be for expanding business grants. And then there's a little bit more information to make a decision about whether we actually want to, whether you actually want to get a couple of council members or get it on an agenda. So there's initially a little bit more information. And I've found over 10 years that approach works well for just gathering information initially before deciding whether it was something that I wanted to get added to an agenda. So that was just my own experience. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional good of the order? All right. Seeing none, we are adjourned. Oh my God. Council President Hunt, yes.
No, Councilmember Hall had a comment.
No, he never minded.
Oh, he said never mind. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to try this one more time. With no further business, we are adjourned.